Frontiers Unchained.
Welcome to Frontiers Unchained, and today we have an interesting guest, Tony Olendo. Tony actually started in the Web2 space as a developer first and later as an entrepreneur before he saw the opportunities that Web3 offers and thereby pivoted into this space. Tony actually has a very interesting journey to share. He started first as contributor to different crypto projects without a network, and by learning himself and by being engaged and actually investing the time, he got very knowledgeable in the Web3 space and ended up as DevRel, developer relations guy at Polygon, where his role comprises of explaining what Web3 is, but also getting more and more people on board by educating them, giving them information and all other tools they need to actually get started building different applications for hopefully real life use cases. Thereby, it's a very interesting episode, I think, for people in underprivileged countries with a laptop and an internet connection to learn more how to get started and to get engaged in this space. Hi, Tony. Tell us a bit more about your background.
Oh, well, yeah. So my name is Tony Olendo. I've been a software developer for over 10 years. I worked in startups for most of that time. So I built a couple of my own. A mobile and web developer, started writing software before there were smartphones, mobile apps before there were smartphones. And I transitioned into Web3 in about 2017, where I had my first startup. That didn't go very well because of the winter that I guess everybody knows about that we entered into in 2017 into 18 after the ICO craze. Went back into a Web2 gig for some time and started making my way back into Web3 in 2020 into 2021. So currently, I worked at Coordinate, where I was part of the team that was helping build out the DAO tooling contract, and I work primarily on the front end, but also a bit on the back end with the contracts and everything else. And now I currently work at Polygon as the lead DevRel engineer, and I'm in charge of developer education at Polygon because I kind of developed a passion for giving back, as most developers do when they join Web3. There's a very strong unction that people get to want to give back and minimize the journey that developers take to get into proficiency in Web3. So that kind of led me to Polygon, and I've been there for a year now. And I'm looking forward to building inside of the Web3 space and expanding and meeting new people and solving new challenges. Yeah.
Well, thanks for elaborating that. But let's break that down a bit more into shorter pieces. Like first in your Web2 journey as a developer, but also as an entrepreneur. What drove you to get into the software development, and later what drove you to become an entrepreneur? And then maybe we can also dive into how you pivoted eventually into the Web3 space.
Yeah. I think for me, the thing that was really exciting is that I had been around computers from when I was very young. My mother first got a computer, MS-DOS computer, when I was like 6 years old or something of that sort, and she would bang away at it, and I was always interested in how it works and how it kind of functions, but nobody really told me about the software development aspect of computers until I was like almost 18 or 19. I mean, we'd done some stuff in school. I studied binary and a bunch of other things, but there was nothing really practical that was like taught in terms of how you could actually create things. And so while I was in Kenya and I was looking for something to do, I was actually wanting to go to do international relations, because I was a big I still am a big history buff, and like I had the papers and everything. And then somebody recommended and said, one of our family friends said, there's this course you should go and do on mobile development. It seems like something that would actually interest you. And it gave me it showed me how to become a producer inside of technology and not just a consumer. And when I realized, you mean we have creative capabilities, and I know people don't necessarily consider software development as like a creative art, but I think it is, because you start off with a project, you hit file project new, and then you have at the end of that process, you have something that people are interacting with every day, and it's changing lives and all these things. So that was like the kind of passion I kind of saw the potential for how technology works, how it could be leveraged, how it could be built, but more so, I kind of got into it because I realized there's an inexhaustible um, learning path that would always keep me engaged for the rest of my career. So I could easily see myself coding at 70 or something of that sort, and that's what really gave me a passion for the for technology. And I went into Web 2 work. I did websites. After that, I worked at an ad agency. I worked at a straight up technology company, and then I got into fintech, and I started working at a credit union in Kenya, which it was the largest community-owned credit union. And then is when I kind of began to see what like the financial what financial access could mean to people. And you're seeing customers who came in, they didn't have anything, they were just saving slowly, they were working somewhere, and then they save up a little money, they make the down payment, and they could finally buy a small taxi. And you see them a few years later, they have a fleet, they've changed their lives and all these things. And so seeing that whole journey and progression of people just showed me the kind of limitless potential that exists inside of Africa, and inside of people and humans in general, once you give them
Mm.
opportunities to be able to actually grow and improve themselves. So that's what started me off into the journey of becoming an entrepreneur in Web3. I'm in Web2 specifically, and
Yeah.
I tried to build a couple of things there. They weren't super successful, but it still gave me a lot of knowledge in terms of how to build things that customers want. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really like how you phrased that, right? Comparing coding to art, and to become a good artist, you need to hone your skills. Of course, some people are more gifted than others, but in the end of the day, it's just making the hours to a certain extent. And in addition to that, it's also, I think, shaped you as well, is that you came from more maybe a social background, let's say, where you focus more on the soft skills or the international relations, as you said yourself, and then pivoted towards programming, where you bring both together by working at the startup, where you're actually helping people in certain, maybe on the some other people say undeveloped regions. So that's quite interesting that shaped you. And how did you eventually pivot towards Web3?
So those initial forays I made, partly because I was working in fintech before. At the time, I had worked in fintech, um, um, and I'd built out my startup, and then I had a significant life change where I moved from Africa, and the business just couldn't run with me remotely. And so part of that, but that kind of whet my appetite in terms of, okay, what does the next iteration of fintech look like? And everybody, I mean, I had friends who were in blockchain from the very beginning, and I was aware of the industry. And then I began looking into it, and somebody reached out to me, asked me to do like a technical assessment on a startup they were building at the time. And they kind of pulled me in. It was a huge start. It was a huge opportunity that we felt at the time, where we made a big bet on Ripple, for
Yeah.
cross-border payments and all those things. And it was like a really compelling use case. It was just like way too early for us to be talking about those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And so when that happened, and then we went into crypto winter, we couldn't raise in time, and we had to move on. I went into uh, I went back into Web 2 actually, and I started another startup based out of Dallas, that was solving a totally different problem in healthcare recruiting. And then when that kind of folded, I was like, okay, so what next? And I began looking into the thing that I was most passionate about, which is financial inclusion, cross border payments, expanding payments for the global south, banking the unbanked, even though that's like a really played out phrase now because everybody says it all the time. But those are the things that I guess lie at the core of like my heart and my motivations in terms of looking at the intersection of payments. And then things had developed significantly inside of the Ethereum space when themes such as decentralization and governance and all of these things all of these themes kind of really appeal to me, because by nature that's just how I view the world. And I kind of like I naturally gravitated towards DAOs and all of these things because they were like finally in terms of just people-led movements that basically restore control and power back to individuals rather than central authorities is something that I would always I'd always advocate for in a way that is responsible and still like achieves progress. And specifically for Africa, I think that is a model that would particularly scale given just the significant governance issues that the continent faces. So it was a natural fit. And it still goes back to what Yusuf Ayale always says, that at the end of the day, when I look at Africa, I feel as though Web3 needs Africa because Web3 finds its greatest product market fit inside of Africa. And I think looking at things like the values of Ethereum and all of those things, I think they find natural fit inside of the global south generally. So that's why I came back.
Yeah. Well, thanks for explaining that, because it's really nice what you say, right? It's not only cross-border, it's not only payments, but also from maybe on legal or jurisdiction from a structural side regarding DAOs or any other structures we have within blockchain that can make changes in Africa. So at some point you maybe can zoom in a bit more into Ripple. So at one point you guys you think about the use case. Of course, Ripple from the technological side can maybe be something which at that point was not ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
But those fundamental beliefs you guys had back then, if you look at it from the current situation, what are the lessons you would have learned and what would be possible in the current time?
I think one of the things when I really contrast the developments of that time and now, I think crypto as an industry has changed and it's developed significantly, right? All of these were no more than open source repos, right? 2017, yeah, Ethereum was around, but it wasn't like this big thing, There were mostly things that nerds and speculators were geeking out on and a couple of VCs. So it wasn't like a huge thing. Right now you have really strong like billion-dollar companies, protocols that about like the TVL is amazing. So if you look at just the progression in terms of TVL from like 2017 to now, it tells you everything you need to know about the growth and the level of adoption of the crypto industry. And so part of what I would say is that we've seen the development of really strong protocols. And I guess part of the difference now, even when you're looking at the global south and you're looking at Africa, I see just a fundamental disconnect in terms of how most protocols view and interact with the global south in a way that kind of ignores the potential and the opportunities that exist inside the global south, partly because they want to approach things from the predominantly Western lens. And the reality is that the strategies that supported crypto adoption in other markets will not be the same ones that will support crypto adoption here. And so part of what I'm kind of like continually looking at and talking to people about is helping protocols and different individuals view Africa in a way that is productive for both parties, rather than coming and giving out black T-shirts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really So how do you see mass adoption or adoption in Africa start? Looking at the human capital from the human capital side, how do you see that evolve? And then what I mean by that means, of course, a lot of things are open source, a lot of information out there. Do you see the adoption coming from the younger generation? Because if you look at the average age of or median age of Africa, I think is about between 20 and 30, somewhere,
Mhm.
depending on which country you're
Oh,
looking at.
lower. It's like
Lower even.
19, 17 or something of that sort in certain places. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So there is definitely a demand from the younger generation, because obviously blockchain is going to play an important part in payments in the financial sector as we know it now in
Mhm.
10 in 20 years. So how do you see what will be the driver of mass adoption on that end, do you think?
So part of what I kind of begin to see is that there's the initial use case, right? So um, I spent time in Nigeria, Uganda, Nairobi, and everybody's talking about real world use cases, practical adoption, uh, uh, onboarding the next 1 billion users and all of those things. So I've sat with very many entrepreneurs and founders. Well, I wouldn't say very many, but quite a number of Web3 founders. And I'm seeing a lot of innovation happening in the space around how merging existing payment rails with with crypto. What does that mean? So, for instance, the thing with Africa, as you and I know, is that we kind of Africa generally leapfrogged, and if you look at the global South generally, it also leapfrogged, right, from traditional the traditional banking system, the alternate banking channels kind of leapfrog from credit cards and all of those things to mobile, right? And we see that in China, we see that in Brazil, we see that in very many jurisdictions, and the the biggest opportunities I think I see inside the frontier markets in terms of higher transaction count for various chains and for various builders and all of those things is they're looking at um, facilitating payments while using existing payment rails. So off ramping and like last mile connections using existing payment rails, I think is really kind of helps like bridge the gap. Why? Because there's a very I'll give you an example. I met a very
Yeah.
enterprising young man in Kampala, where figured out he went to Turkey. So he figured out that there's trade between Uganda and Turkey. And I think when I went to research, the annual trade between Uganda and Turkey is about $300 million, right?
Hmm.
So he went to Turkey, registered as a temporary permanent as a temporary resident, so he could open a Turkish bank account. And he came back to Uganda. And what he does is that he basically facilitates payments between Turkish businessmen and Ugandan businessmen. And he basically switches transactions using Binance's peer-to-peer market, and he's crushing it. Like he's done amazing sales. I think this year he's gonna about a year is gonna cross $1 million in like just transactions. And this is just one dude. There's no significant like automation. There's no huge mobile app. It's just Binance
Hmm.
peer to peer. But he's solving a huge problem because he's helping the local he's helping his local business. He's helping local businesses in Uganda not need to buy the USD, right? So he takes the Ugandan shillings
Yeah.
and he gives them a rate and he converts it on the back end, and he gives the Turkish businessman I'm not sure what Turkish lira on the other end, and he's basically solving that particular problem. So those are the kinds of
Yeah.
opportunities that you begin to see that kind of help frame what trade could look like and what adoption looks like inside of Web3 and inside of Africa and frontier markets in general. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting what you just said there, right? That you don't need the current banking system, but you can just go outside of it and just start your own own OTC desk, let's say, where you can do
Basically.
cross border currencies.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and this is just the start, right? I think on and off ramp is of course the start of things. At some point,
Hmm.
you will do borrowing lending. You will do a lot of new products will come out, which are accessible for people even in the most remote regions who have access to coming on and off chain.
Yeah.
So I do understand your thesis regarding blockchain, and especially that's going to play a big part in Africa, as I said myself as well. But what do you see as the biggest challenges for these entrepreneurs to operate currently in Africa?
So you give me room because I keep talking about this on it takes me time to unpack this analogy I have, but I'll try to do it briefly. So part of what I kind of see is that there's an inherent limitation, one, at the level of innovation, but part of what Africa kind of needs is education. And I'll tell you what that looks like. So if
Yeah.
you're looking at let's say we need an African ecosystem, right? An African Web3 ecosystem. So I went into the whole thing. So what the thought popped in my mind, and I went and I researched. So what does an ecosystem look like? How does it function, and all of those things? And essentially, you have three levels of an ecosystem. You have producers, consumers, and then you have decomposers. Um, Producers essentially support the fundamentals of life, right? So if you think of a sea, it's the plankton that they're almost imperceptible to the eye, but they feed the fish that then feed that other fish feed on. Like they provide the fundamentals. If you think of them
Yeah.
terrestrially, it's like the plant life, right? These are the producers. So plant life, and then you have an animal that comes and eats the plant, and then another animal comes and eats that animal, and so on and so forth, right? And that particular rank is the once you move past the producer, you have the consumers, right? So the consumers, and inside of that, there's
Mm.
cyclical cycles. I mean, the cyclical groupings of one consumer, another one, another one, another one, another one, so on and so forth. Um, and so once you move past that particular stage, um, Petros, are you still there? Okay, cool. All right. Um, I'm just gonna. So once you move past that particular stage, um, you then have a the you then have the decomposers. And the decomposers are things like the vultures and things that come and like take apart like
Mm.
different pieces. They basically help. They're like the vultures, the hyenas, almost
Yeah.
the different micro organisms that help break down things and all those things. Okay, so
Yeah.
producers, consumers, decomposers. Part of
Mm.
how Web3 functions, if you look at it now, um, who would you say are the producers?
It's a good question. It's a good question.
And who would you say are the consumers? So, and part of it is that so you have protocols that exist, right? So Ethereum comes as a protocol with an agenda and all of these things. They have objectives and all of, and then we invite builders to come on top of that particular protocol, and then they build whatever they want to build. But it's still the producer's game, right? Um, and then you have the consumers who would be different people who are building different protocols, trying different things, small enterprises, big, large ones, startups. They're building different dApps and all of the kinds of different things, which are really interesting and useful. And then you have the roles that they leave for us, for most Africans, which is like decomposer. So they'll come, and you have people who come to Africa with a predatory kind of a thing, and they say, "We want you to be our community manager. Could you please go and just shill us, basically?" Um, And could you go and do like community outreach, or could you do awareness? We want you to roll up banners whenever the big people come to Africa and take photos and so on and so forth. So it's like there's a whole spread. Now, the beauty of Web3 is that there was no way for you to come from a decomposer to a producer. Previous iterations of the web, that was not possible. Decisions are made in Silicon Valley. You don't even know what code Facebook is running or something of that sort. The beauty of Web3 is that anybody could be a producer. And that's the fundamental game changer for Africa and for the global South. But then the question is, how do we create more producers, right? So if you look at it in terms of a knowledge and an education perspective, we have a lot of knowledge that is useful at the decomposer level. So if you and I choose to start a chain and we're targeting Africa, the first thing we look for is, let's find somebody to build a community for us. We can find that easily, right?
Yeah.
Okay, then let's go find entrepreneurs who could build on our chain. We could find that fairly easily inside of Africa. Okay, let's go and find protocol engineers who can build the protocol from Africa. It's harder. So part of the journey I'd like to see in terms of education is, how do we empower Africans not just to be consumers of the blockchain, but actual producers? And I think that whole journey occurs if we have sufficient knowledge being built, sufficient understanding being established inside of the builders to build protocol level engineers. So now, for instance, and by protocol level, what do I mean? In terms of somebody who could fundamentally build a blockchain. If you want to launch an L1, how many African developers could you find? If you want to build a ZK VM in Africa, how many developers could you find? I mean, the case could be made, why do I need to, and so on and so forth, which is a different argument altogether. But the fact that you could say, you could answer the same question in any other jurisdiction and find an answer, but you cannot find one here, is a fundamental problem we need to solve. So that's my short to long thesis in terms of what I see as the biggest need.
Yeah. This is a very strong thesis, and I follow you with a lot of points, and I just want to highlight a few things here, and then especially regarding education and regarding having a younger population and knowledge. So, do you need engineers to come from Africa or not? That's a question which is in the middle. But I do like it that you say people can become a producer, and that's something that seat on the table is something a lot of Africans feel that they never had. So going back to the educational part and knowledge-based parts, how do you see that? How do you see the people? How are people able to get that knowledge? Is that something which still can be done decentralized, where you can do things open source, you can do your own code base? And are you then good enough to get to a certain level? Or should it be something which is done more institutional, where people get access to government systems? Or how do you see that? How do you see that? Yeah. How do you see people acquire that knowledge base?
Yeah.
To get at a certain level. Yeah.
Yeah. So the same spiel I've just given you here, I had with a really amazing educator in Nigeria called Ebu Ebunayo. He runs Web3 Africa, no, Web3 Bridge. And what I was trying to tell him is, we need to move to protocol level. And essentially, what it looks like is, the kinds of education that we need to give and build inside of Africa is hands-on tactical education, right? So he runs a program where he has people come for 4 months. They stay. It's a residential program. He teaches them the fundamentals of the blockchain, and he gets them to actually build on top of the blockchain. And it's a very rigorous course. It's 4 months. It's hard. People get kicked out. He's very disciplined and regimented. But he's undeniably produce results. So the question is, how do we scale patterns such as those across the across the continent? And when I spoke with him, he says, yeah, there's a couple of people I have who are doing more protocol stuff now. So just a natural evolution of a quality education base being given to developers as they enter Web3 provides an, a base knowledge that allows other people to go in and actually begin to produce at the protocol level. And so part of the beauty of this whole system is that I mean, I sat with Nigerian builders who say they would never have gotten remote jobs or something of that sort, but because they sat through that particular program, many lives have been changed. People have bought property, people have established themselves and their families and all these things. So Web3 opens up a massive opportunity inside of the global south for our youth. Massive opportunity. Because in Web3, I mean, to a large extent, nobody cares where you're from, what you look like, and all these things. And so you have a greater level of equality of access than you did in the traditional job market. And so how we build practically is that we have to, again, as a continent, start to strategize and organize, which is partly what I'm probably going to start doing from next year. Is how do we have more protocol level engineering programs, starting at the level of individual boot camps, and how do we scale this level of knowledge? And like the future that I see is how do we get more collaborations with Israeli universities who have cryptography courses with universities in Africa who have the brains and have the smarts, but we need to help. We need to pull in some of the resources from universities in Austria and universities in Israel, or universities in the US, and so on and so forth. And the academic world in more ways than one is kind of primed for these kinds of collaborations, but it needs somebody to actually sit down and strategically organize, to build a new cadre of cryptographers from Africa with the requisite knowledge, so that 10 years from now, we are not further behind inside of the ZK discussions, and we're not further behind in terms of protocol level discussions. Strategy is the only way. Somebody has to be deliberate about it. Maybe that's me. Who knows?
Thanks for explaining that, Tony. I think you underwrite there that Web3 is really going to be a big opportunity, and we're just getting started. So for somebody who maybe doesn't have the funds to go to a bootcamp, but really wants to get started in Web3 and has a laptop with an internet connection somewhere in Kampala or in Addis Ababa or in Nairobi, what would you advise them to do to get started in Web3?
So all of this is like, there are a lot of different organizations you could reach out to. So first of all, try and find out like what your local community looks like. If you're in Nairobi, look for guys like Kiboko DAO. If you're in Kampala, the people who are doing like, there's a blockchain association. In Nigeria, I'm going to shill Web3 Bridge. If you're in Ghana, look for Aya Gigs. And if you're anywhere in Africa, basically, I'm going to shill Aya Gigs, because Aya Gigs does Pan-African cohorts. Web3 Bridge also does Pan-African cohorts. So there's opportunities for you to get started there. If you don't want to do like a formal program, there's a lot of education initiatives that exist online. I found boot camps online that I've used. But more than anything, these are not skills that you need to think about very heavily. There's Polygon Learn, which I'm launching hopefully sometime soon, where you'd be able to get basic knowledge in terms of getting to Web3, and also getting you to beyond just the basic level of writing an NFT contract to like 201, 301, and how to build more complex things. So there's a lot of things that you could do. But if you really, really want to reach out, you could just hit me up. I am at Tony Olendo on Twitter and on Telegram. You want to get started, reach out to me, and I talk to all sorts of people at different points in time. And there's a lot of resources. You could check out Austin Griffith's course. No, Austin Griffith's Scaffold ETH, which I'll send to Petros, and hopefully he'll link somewhere inside of this. And there's also Patrick Collins' 32-hour bootcamp that gives you an introduction to Web3, either from a Python standpoint or from a JavaScript standpoint. So you have a couple of options there that would really work. So there's an IRL component and there's a fully virtual component. And then once you start to get into things, there's a few things that I would recommend you do. Fundamentally, get into ETH Global and start to participate in the hackathons. Those hackathon prizes could be really significant. You're talking about upwards of like $1,000, $2,000, which we know how far that goes inside of Africa. $1,000, $2,000, you could significantly impact people's lives just by winning a single hackathon bounty. ETH Global has one or two bounties. One or two hackathons running at any point in time. So you have an immediate way that you could start to earn in Web3, which is an important process while you're actually learning. And once you start to get into like some of those levels, is finding really strong communities. There's a community that I personally co-founded, called Web3 Africa, where we have organized boot camps, and we'll be doing a lot more for the next year in terms of just organizing practical education initiatives that really could work and help build people up inside of Web3. But nothing beats IRL. So finding your local community. Inside of most countries, you'll find some level of people who are interested in things that you're interested in. And if all else, if you don't have anybody, feel free to reach out to me, and I could try to connect you to the people I know.
Nice. So you can really take part of something global by organizing on a local level, and you have access to all the open source code, which all the global organization and all the different chains, of course, offer on a local level, and that's something which Web3 does provide to people in frontier markets, and Web2 didn't. So that's a big game changer in my opinion. Having said that, you are also DevRel at Polygon.
Yeah.
Maybe you can tell me a bit more about what your current role is and what do you mainly focus on?
Yeah, so currently I lead developer education at Polygon, which was an interesting journey for me. I started off by pitching the head of DevRel at the time on building an education platform so people could come and learn stuff. And he was like, why don't you come and build it at Polygon? And so that's how I kind of got into Polygon. And at the time I did, came when there was this brand new thing called the ZK EVM that was being launched. And I didn't know a lick about, no, I lie. I started working, I was consulting for a ZK project. It was still very, very new, sometime in 2018, with a couple of professors from somewhere, and they were building something. So that's the first time I was introduced to the concept of zero knowledge technology, but then it was still like super early, and they were still building proofs of concept and all these things. But I delved into the math for a bit, and then I kind of just pushed that to the side since about 2018, 2019 there. And then when I got into Polygon, there was a ZK EVM that was being built, and that was like a whole rabbit hole that kind of opened up, that let me really delve into the ZK space. And I met all the luminaries that you would know at Polygon, Jordi and David Schwartz and Anthony and Brendan Farmer and all of these amazing builders. And that's when I kind of started getting into like the zero knowledge space and started building my own circuit. So I'm no researcher or anything of that sort, but I think applied ZK really kind of interests me. And yeah, so building a lot more zero knowledge circuits, helping people understand different things, has been like a real passion area for me. And yeah, just looking forward to moving that space forward from a ZK standpoint, but also just in terms of a key point for my consideration is usually how do we build for the next bull market, and I want to help find as many developers, competent core developers, and bring them to Ethereum, so that we have a strong base of builders who are ready to build when the next bull market comes. So that really
Yeah.
is like my focus and mission at Polygon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just for a lot of listeners, probably don't have an understanding of what ZK is. Some do. Can you maybe put in a very, very high level way what ZK is and how it potentially can change how blockchains work in the future?
Oh wow. Okay. So again, I don't even think it's a matter of the future per se, because we're seeing a lot of ZK L2s come out. ZK rollups, but essentially zero knowledge rollups allow you to state that you know what you know without revealing what you know. So if you think of it in terms of different kinds of application, imagine if I could attest that I am who I am without necessarily revealing like information about myself. If you look at your ID card or your driver's license, it has your name, it has your address, it has your date of birth, it has a lot of information about yourself. And every time you need to show your ID card, you're showing people all of this information. So imagine if we were to use zero knowledge to be able to do that. So let's say you're going to buy alcohol in the US, and the US has a stipulation that states that you have to be over 21 for you to buy alcohol. Currently, I need to tell you all of my business for me to be able to buy alcohol. If this is if the vendor does ask for my ID. But when we use zero knowledge technology, we could actually obfuscate all of this information and provide a cryptographic proof that verifies that I am indeed over 21. And that's it. So because of technology and everything that we have, all I need to do is present a proof that I'm over 21, and the individual on the other side of it sees that and is like, okay, yeah, this guy is verifiably over 21. Fine. And that's all. So I don't reveal my address, I don't reveal my name, I don't reveal my date of birth and anything of that sort. So that's essentially how the fundamental of how ZK could change our lives from an identity standpoint. But then you could graduate that example, and but inside of blockchains, it's not the biggest application is that we actually take like a batch of transactions and we provide a single small proof that essentially summarizes all of this information. So imagine if you have a receipt, a super long receipt that has a bunch of different entries, and you could actually produce something that's like a QR code that represents that. That's what we're able to do with transactions on the blockchain. So we use a QR code, and we present that QR code. And if anybody scans it, they get all of the information about all of the full receipt. But then because it's a blockchain, we could summarize that and put that on chain. And the only thing that's being stored on chain is that particular QR code. And with that, we're able to build scalable solutions, because now, whereas Ethereum could only process 15 transactions before that, I could have a super long receipt of transactions, like 100,000, and everything gets summarized into a single QR code because of zero knowledge technology, and because it's a mathematical proof that essentially allows us to attest to the length of this particular receipt. And that single small proof, the smaller it is, the more adaptable it is for blockchains, because space is very important, because you have a decentralized network of nodes. And so it's that QR code that essentially gets stored to Ethereum, and everybody could use to be able to to be able to represent my super long receipt of like transactions. So that's what
Yeah.
that really is the biggest application from an identity and to a blockchain perspective.
Yeah, and then a ton of use cases, right? Which could work in especially frontier markets, I think. And without diving in detail, it will just enable things to operate decentralized, and trustless, and permissionless, so that
Mm-hmm.
you don't need the intermediaries to verify
Exactly.
or to be there exactly, and people can just interact with each other, which will have major application. At least that's what we assume at this point of time.
Yeah.
And the reason why I ask you the question is because I think you have a very good understanding, of course, of ZK, of all the technical stuff, but you also
Yeah.
know the soft part, right? Of
Yeah.
like how much devs are building, how can people get educated, and just to show people more in a quantitative way of how big the opportunity is and how little or how small the group is we're actually building, to show them what the opportunity, what kind of opportunity we're talking about. How much, if you break it down in like, let's say, normal devs working on Solidity, and you break it down on people who are working on more the high level stuff on, or maybe you have a better way of breaking it down, of more like on the infrastructure level, and the people who are building on the ZK level. If you put there an absolute number on that, how big would that group be in your opinion?
Total people in Ethereum who are working on ZK?
Yeah, so how big would people be working within the Ethereum? Is that 10? Is that 20,000? And how big is the group of people working on ZK technology, basically?
This goes back to my analogy of producers, consumers, and decomposers, and so on and so forth. But so inside of Ethereum, I think the Ethereum core contributors, I think that's a known figure. I'm not sure what the latest figure is, but it's like
Just high level.
a couple of hundred people who've contributed to the lifetime of that repo. And so once you move beyond that, the number of people who could work on ZK are working on ZK right now. I doubt could fill a bus. So yeah, it's definitely sub 100.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but these are core engineers, right? If you
Yeah,
zoom
these are
out a
core
bit
engineers.
more, like people who are just building dApps and just playing
Oh,
around with technology, how big is that group?
in terms of, well, the estimate now in terms of Web3 developers is 20,000. And 2020 tending towards 30,000 now. Of course, these numbers change a lot, especially with the bear market, which kind of is a good thing, which helps us filter through and get like just the people who are fundamentally aligned and are willing to ride the storms, as it were. But in terms of dApp developers, the landscape is really huge. You have people all across the world. I meet people all across the world building. So that number, I'd say, would stands at about 30,000. Protocol level is actually less. For Ethereum, say about maybe actively 200 or something of that sort.
Yeah.
If you're looking at competent smart contract developers across the world, I think that number, I'm talking about people who could do NFT contracts, I'm talking about competent smart contract developers. Those
Yeah.
would be, of which I don't even consider myself remotely close to that. It probably could be about 100. These are people who you could
Yeah.
call today to build like an algorithmic stablecoin or some brand new DeFi primitive or like an EIP or something of that sort.
Yeah.
That number is fairly low.
Yeah, and that
Mhm.
and that shows you how small currently the group is, and if you listen to what we said during the whole podcast, and that is that obviously a lot of things are going to happen on blockchain. They're going to be more layer twos. They're going to be more different ways of solutions of systems, how people are going to interact with each other on the blockchain.
Mhm.
You can understand that this group needs to be much bigger. So if you're a young guy and you want to, as you said, be an artist writing software, you need to develop your skill. You need to put in the hours, and if you see this opportunity out there in the market currently with such a small group of people building,
Yeah.
which is definitely going to go in the future, this is one of the biggest opportunities, I think, as a young guy with a laptop
Yep.
and with the technical capability to jump on.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
point that's actually the point I want to make. If you're based in Africa and you have a laptop, you have internet connection, you have
Even
access
a
for
mobile phone.
even on a mobile phone.
Yeah. Yeah, people code on mobile phones. Replit is available. It's very responsive. Even if you have a mobile phone, you could just go and Replit. I mean, it doesn't even need to be like a super smartphone. Once it has an interface that you could actually interact with, yeah, start on a mobile phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, from the probability side, the chance of being a very good developer, if you put 10,000 hours of code into it, is much, much higher than
Exactly.
if you put 10,000 hours in playing football to become a
Yeah.
football player.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's so easy now these days for, if you are dedicated, if you have heart, and of course a bit of brains for it,
Mm-hmm.
to become very successful in this new space, basically, which is gonna shape the future of internet, how we communicate with each other, how we gonna do payments with each other, how we gonna the financial system, all these different components are gonna change due to blockchain. So that's what I
Yeah.
just want to give
Yeah.
to our listeners.
Yeah. Yeah. And just for my own process, I think with the significant leaps I've made in terms of understanding technology, have always happened where I just block off the world for like a month or two as I'm learning a brand new skill. And that's it. I just block off the world. Like,
Yeah.
you won't find me meetings, all these kinds of things. Um, I do what I need to do at work, of course, but once I'm off work, I'm doing this one thing, and that's how I was able to get back into Web3. So it takes a willingness to do the hard part, which is like dedicate time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how would you advise people to, obviously you get started and at some point you hit a wall, right? How do you get people? What was your driver that you continued while even you probably have had challenges in your journey as well into being a developer and to getting more and more involved in the field? What was your main driver that kept you going?
Fundamentally, just not. Um, it was the clarity of purpose, right? A lot of what I do is driven by the fact that there's a clear directive. I feel that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And once I have the clarity of mind that this is the thing, this is the next step in my journey and my evolution, right? So, same thing when I was a mobile developer, there was a point of realization that this is the thing I'm supposed to be doing. And I dedicate the time and the hours to be able to actually do that. So it's a fundamental factor of how I pursue what I feel or what I understand to be my purpose on the earth. And once that becomes clear, everything else everything else just aligns. And so, in terms of how I consider what my next step is, it takes time to clarify what that is. But once I consider and I'm clear, this is what it is, I'm able to spend and organize life to produce the result that would have been expected. Yeah. I don't know if that's helpful.
Thanks for those closing words. Do
Yeah.
you maybe have, as a final, as we're nearing the end of this episode, do you maybe have a final advice you can give to our listeners who want to get involved into the Web3 space?
Start. I know people say it sounds weird. I just say start. Like, stop thinking about it and just start. Where to start could be a good question. I think part of it is that I spent a lot of time networking on Twitter and finding people I could ask questions and all of those things. And that will always be a particular journey. But Web3 doesn't just need developers. We need marketers, we need designers, we need HR people, we need different levels of understanding and like skills and competencies. And so the fundamental thing is understanding the values of why we're doing what we're doing, right? It's a it's an interesting space that you need a why. So clarify your why, and once you know why, it'll be easy for you to align your energies and your efforts towards increasing in the space and beyond that, it's just a voracious learning appetite, making sure that you're supposed to be doing what you're supposed to be doing, talking with the same people, networking the way you're supposed to. Even though I kind of hate the word networking, I think just relating with the people that you're supposed to be relating with. I think I prefer that phrase. And yeah.
Well, thanks for taking your time, Tony. And yeah, there were some really strong final words, and hopefully we have motivated people to get started with their journey into the Web3 space.
Yeah. And if you're looking to start, again, I'm going to say this again at the end. Feel free to reach out to me. Whatever skill, whatever discipline, you don't have to be a dev. You could be a lawyer even, and you're wanting to get into the space. Please reach out to me, Tony Olendo, on Twitter, on Telegram. I will respond eventually. But yeah.
Thanks. Cheers.
Frontiers Unchained.